This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Interested in learning more about investing in startups, launching a new startup, and need to raise funding? The Startup Funding Espresso is a daily podcast in a short, concise format delivered to your inbox every day, Monday through Friday. In the time it takes to drink an espresso, you can learn about startup funding. To subscribe, go to investorconnect.org and put your email into the pop-up box. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Caroline Lewis, partner at Rogue Venture Partners and managing partner of Rogue's Women's Fund. Rogue Venture Partners is a venture capital firm specializing in seed stage technology startups across the U.S. with a focus on undercapitalized regions. Caroline, thank you for joining us.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So what was your background before investing in early stage companies?
Yeah, well, I think like many people, I actually got into venture through a circuitous route. I, graduated undergrad in a liberal arts education out of Davidson College in North Carolina. Thought I was going to be a lawyer. Realized I didn't want to be a lawyer after working with a great law firm for a year, and decided actually to move across the world over to South Korea to teach English. Came back, ended up in all places, West Virginia. I always tell people that was for love. Worked out. He's now my husband. But when I was there, I worked for my first time in a startup. And it was kind of when the startup bug really bit me. Really amazing woman. Ran a company there, a couple of companies. I joined her, did everything from, cold calling hospitals, doing the accounting, sourcing products from China, and just fell in love with that pace of life. But I also got to see firsthand how really, building companies and creating jobs can do so much for a community. So I knew at that point I wanted to get my MBA, start my own company, which I did. And then it also shut down and when I was getting my MBA. And then from there, I really went into management consulting. I wanted to learn a lot more about technology and do a lot more technology implementations. And as I was doing that, climbed up the ranks, worked for Nike a stint, but I got to a place where I was interested in angel investing and joined a few different angel investing groups. And, I would walk into a room, it was all dudes, and people would say, oh, just read the Venture Deals book and you'll figure it out. And, I just thought there had to be a better way. Along my path, I had met Tom Sperry. He was the managing partner of Rogue, and he's been an absolutely instrumental person in my life, great mentor. And I decided I was going to take him out to breakfast and try to pick his brain on, things I should be investing in and just try to see how he thinks about things. And in those conversations, I would share what I was looking at, how I was thinking. And, when they were kicked off Fund 3, we had established that relationship. I think, he'd gotten to get to know me a little bit and also how I thought about investments. I met the rest of the team and, they asked me to come on board, and I just said yes. I didn't even think about it. I didn't know how the back end of venture capital worked at that time. I just said, this is amazing, dream come true. And it's been the best decision I made in my life. So I've been with Rogue since before Fund 3. We're now on Fund 4. It's been a fantastic journey, but yeah, a little bit different than some other folks who get into the venture industry.
Wow, that's quite a journey there. So what excites you right now?
Yeah, I have to say, when we kicked off our thesis for Fund 4, we really wanted to, of course, focus on what we are knowledgeable and good at. There's some things that excite me that we invest in. Then there's some things that, excite me that we don't particularly focus on. So I have to say, some of my Kauffman fellow colleagues that are investing in space and deep tech, that is always exciting to me. Some of the areas that are a little bit more familiar and both exciting is really in the health space, which I know, recently, especially with COVID, health and education has gotten a lot of attention. But I would say we've been investing in the health space, but leaning even more into what they call aging tech or death tech or caring tech. I just think that's going to be pretty explosive in the years to come, in the next 5 years. And really fascinating to see the various technologies that are coming out, both to connect people direct to consumer, but also, B2B business. So that's a space that excites me. There's also, HR tech is, some people have an aversion to it. There's some pros and cons, but HR tech is really starting to see a revitalization, especially in D&I technology. Now that, that's more of a topic of conversation in our country. It's a little lagging in my opinion, but we have the advantage of being investors. So we're always investing, years ahead of where the rest of the population is necessarily coming to. So I've been seeing some really fantastic different technologies about equaling the playing field for employees at all different levels. So that's been pretty exciting. And then also B2B marketplaces, which I never thought I'd say I get too excited about, but there's some interesting industries that, have, still use fax machines, still, people go door to door with, binders of information. And so those industries, when I look at it, are just ripe for disruption. And if anything, this past year, especially with COVID, people working remotely, working from home has accelerated the need for those industries to adopt technology. So I'm seeing some very interesting businesses in, what are sleepy industries or industries that are not sexy, but just ripe for disruption and, plenty of capital flowing through them. So those are some areas that interest me right now.
Great. Well, you see a lot of investors and a lot of startups. What's your advice for people investing in startups? What do you tell them to do before they write that first check?
Well, as a person who had a little exposure with angel investing and then on the VC side, which are very different, I always encourage people to first and foremost understand why they are investing. Are you just trying to diversify your portfolio and get a return? Are you trying to invest because you want to learn about different technologies or different industries? So really understanding the purpose and the why of what you're investing and the intention that you're trying to get out of it. From there, it's much easier to navigate where you want to go for your deal flow or for companies that you want to look at. If you're really trying to get a great return, I highly recommend that people, unless they are extremely well connected on their own, not just go straight with angel investing, but actually go and invest in a fund that allows for some direct investments as well, or a fund that helps you educate you on what to look for investment. There's great businesses out there. There's great investments. You're looking for the combination of those two. And then, for people that really just want to give back to their community or be involved or learn different technologies, I say the best is just, locally have, with your connections, try to have that impact with whether it's a school affiliation, your local community, but a place where you really want to put capital to make a difference. And, hopefully you strike it big and, get some nice return. But if that's your primary goal is to really give back or learn about new technologies, definitely go forward with angel investing, but join an angel investing group. There's quite a few of them across the country. I'm not as familiar or in love with, the crowdsourced angel groups of the world. But I know that a lot of people have had success in finding lots of different types of companies that way as well.
And so on the other side of the table, what's your advice for people running startups? What do you tell them to do before they go out to raise that first check?
Well, this is actually a topic that I have quite often with people. I would say I'm mostly the point person for all deal flow for Rogue, and also do a fair amount of volunteering, speaking at different accelerators, incubators, universities. I think in the past 10 years, raising capital has gotten very romanticized. You have Shark Tank out there. You constantly see in the press about how much people are raising or their companies are, valued at $1 billion. The reality of that is that many of those numbers, it's less than 2% of all companies, really. And venture capital doesn't make sense for a lot of companies, most of the companies, and people can make really amazing businesses and have great lives and great outcomes by not raising venture capital. So if you do have your own startup, I would first ask, is venture capital really the right path for you? Generally, it's the right path if you want to have crazy growth, 100%, 200% growth year over year. You want to bring people that are going to make decisions around the table. If you want to give up that control, you want people around the table to help you get to a better place. And you're okay with giving up that control. I often tell people, I'm sure you've heard this before on the podcast, that, when you find an investor, it's not obviously just the money, it's the value they provide. And you are in that partnership for a long time. Most venture partnerships last longer than marriages. So you got to keep that in mind when you're thinking about taking investment from people. And the early stages are probably the most difficult because you're in that chicken and egg scenario. You want a little bit of capital, finish out building what you're building, but you need to finish out building what you're building to get that capital. That's oftentimes where I see people make some risk when they take capital and it's not really from a great place, or they get diluted too much, or they just don't find the right partner. So I would say really think about, do you want to take venture? And if you do want to take venture, make sure you're finding, good partners that you really want to, be with for the long haul. And at the end of the day, if you achieve great metrics, like if you run a well-run, operationally efficient business, you're going to find great people to bring to the table with you. So always focus on just running a great business and then bringing the people that you can really see yourself in a partnership with, 10, 15 years down the line.
Great. So let's talk about the state of venture capital investing. How is the industry evolving these days coming out of the pandemic?
Well, I think it really depends where you sit and what you invest in. I would say if you're a tech investor, any aspect of that, for the most part, you're looking very good. I would say most VCs that I talk to and companies as well, about this time last year, everybody was kind of buckled down. How do you extend your runway 12 months, 18 months, longer? Because we didn't know what was coming. And then what we saw was really, this past year accelerated the adoption of technology, like I mentioned before, in certain industries, or just the overall human behavior, both from a business perspective and a consumer perspective, on really adopting new technologies and getting comfortable with it. So what that did was just open up the floodgates for anybody who's been an investor, investing in things like Peloton. I'm sure everybody you've talked to is of some sort of Peloton, Peloton bike, and they're obsessed with it, or some of, ed tech or health tech. It really accelerated those areas. So when I look at, this past year and kind of opening things up, overall in the venture community right now, I would say there's a lot of capital in the market, which I know can be frustrating for an entrepreneur to hear if they're not the ones receiving that. There's a lot of capital in the market, though. It's increasing valuations significantly. So I'm seeing a lot of deals be a lot more competitive, higher valuations, a little bit more challenging to get into. On the flip side of that, if you're like Rogue, we really focus on undercapitalized regions. So we don't necessarily try to go after that one or two deal that everybody else is chasing. We recognize that people run amazing businesses, and we kind of look for those businesses, go after them, really find great partners to go with. And so I think if you're disciplined and patient, you find amazing people and companies to invest in, which is so important when you think about the return portfolio. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of heat in the market. Investors are making some mistakes and getting a little bit too hot-handed, and entrepreneurs aren't necessarily thinking through keeping their optionality as they grow. I think they're getting enamored with the speed and the kind of chaos of valuations and going with that without necessarily thinking through all the implications of what that means further down the line, especially if there happens to be any sort of pullback. So that was a long-winded way of saying the market's very hot right now. It's a very exciting time to be in the private capital markets, in venture. Lots of amazing different technologies coming out, lots of capital flowing. And I think we're just going to see some really interesting businesses come out of this time period.
And so what do you think is the biggest change we'll see in, say, the next 5 years in venture capital funding?
Yeah, I think, something that's starting to bubble up a little bit more. VCs are definitely using a lot more data to make decisions, which is interesting, especially the earlier that you go into VC, where so much of it is subjective. So a lot more data. There is also a lot more focus on diversity in all aspects, both in the companies that you're investing in, as well as bringing in more diversity into the firms. It's not nearly where it needs to be, but that is happening. And I have confidence that in 5 years, we might see more diversity at the decision-making levels in VC partnerships, which I think will positively affect the types of businesses that we're investing in. In addition to that, I think in the next 5 years, what we're going to see is a little bit more democratization of VC. I think we're starting to see some elements of that. I'm not completely sold on it right now, but I do think that in 5 years, we'll see a little bit more kind of crowdsourced funding or crowd venture funds in some ways. So I also think that there's a lot of seed funds, and 5 years from now, they're going to have proven out their fund too. And we'll see, who comes out of the ranks in 5 years to actually do, a third fund. I think there's going to be a lot of kind of flushing out of people who were able to raise capital pretty easily, but didn't necessarily stay disciplined and thoughtful in their investing process, or they just didn't get lucky as well. And we'll see some of that drop out. I think that's kind of it for the VC industry in the next 5 years. But if I had the crystal ball, I probably wouldn't be doing the job that I have.
Well, cool. Well, you talked about funding underrepresented areas, but can you tell us more about your investment thesis and what exactly you look for?
Yeah, so Rogue has always invested in undercapitalized founders. We just previously really defined that by geo, and we still do. So think of essentially every area outside the Bay Area, even Texas, Seattle, New York, areas where it's a little bit more challenging to get capital. We think this makes for great businesses because they have to get a lot further with what they have. They often have proven a little bit more market traction than most other businesses. They're reasonable valuations. And ultimately, we love the type of entrepreneurs that we find attached to these type of companies. Just the hustle, the grit, go rogue, not just grow to grow, not just get big to get big or have a high valuation just to have it and say, oh, I'm $1 billion company. They're really running a sound fundamental business and solid leaders. So we look for those type of businesses, those types of people. Now, Rogue focuses in B2B, SaaS, enterprise, like I mentioned before, consumer health tech, and then health tech focus in the aging and care tech space. In addition to that, we started the Rogue Women's Fund when I came on board. This was back right before 2018. We wanted to make sure as a firm that we started the fund for three main reasons. First and foremost, we believe that if you want to change, you have to be very intentional about it. So we wanted to create a separate fund to really say, hey, we believe so much that in backing women makes sense. It's a smart business decision. It's not just impactful. Second, we also wanted to have a fund that wasn't just about equality through equity on the entrepreneurship side, but equality through equity on the investor side. So we wanted to encourage more women to invest in this asset class. Many of the women in my network at that time in positions to invest in this asset class really didn't know much about it. And we wanted to have a much more reasonable minimum for a first-time investor. So that was another reason we had a separate fund. And then third, we also, when I was looking at where Rogue typically invest, we could really go after companies that are generally making 500 to a million in revenue, raising a $1 to $3 million round. You can call it pre-seed or seed, depending what part of the country you're in. But for us, we looked at where is the most challenging place for all entrepreneurs to get capital, but especially women. And that place was that first institutional check. So we wanted to have the Rogue Women's Fund invest a little bit earlier than our main fund and really be that first institutional check, often going along lots of times with other angel investors or one or two other institutions. But we're in a position where we feel really confident, comfortable to, set lead terms, which oftentimes gets everybody else off the fence. And we just have the experience and exposure of, over 10 years of investing that we can bring that to the table. So we really wanted to do that with the Rogue Women's Fund. We kicked off the Rogue Women's Fund in 2019, and I'm so excited because within 14 months, we had our first exit, had a really great return already to our investors, which is pretty fantastic in the venture community. And so far, not only is Rogue's thesis proving to work out for us with really good returns on funds 1, 2, and 3, but also on the Rogue Women's Fund.
Can you talk about one or two startups that fit your thesis?
Sure. So I'll talk about with Rogue's Fund 4, which we're currently raising right now. We're almost at the max, which is always exciting. But we decided to go a little bit more into the caring tech space, or even some people call it death tech is another area as well. One of the startups that we invested in is one that we invested out of the Rogue Women's Fund. I'll first highlight, and then I'll talk about the main fund. So Rogue Women's Fund, really fantastic startup called Caregiven. They actually just released very early, pre-seed stage company, all focused on walking an individual through the journey of caregiver, through every single aspect of what they need to address if they're taking care of a loved one who is on the last years of their life. So not just wills or, documents, but how do you capture those key memories, whether you're a person that you're taking care of has a good day or not so good day. So really every single step of the way walks that person through that journey, which is fantastic. Another one that we invested in, again, choose pre-seed, pre-revenue, which is one of the first ones that we did was just pre-revenue, but I had known Candace for about 3 years. So I've been watching it for a while. And then another one that we invested in, All Voices. This was one of the first investments out of our fund. Fantastic company out of LA. Claire Schmidt is the CEO, inspired by the Me Too movement. She actually left a very high profile job to start All Voices, which allows for anonymous reporting of anything, both positive and negative, for any organization to use, but then also on the back end, really streamlines it for HR to be able to communicate back with employees and foster an environment where you can really get ahead of, major issues that might be arising in your organization before they kind of hit the press. It's really been fantastic to see her growth in that company. So those are a couple of examples out of the Rogue Women's Fund. With the main fund, an investment that we just made is actually into a second time founder. We had backed him once. He had Sightbox. He ended up selling it to J&J. Great fund returner for our fund too. He actually, started another company called Repario, which is all about sending at-home kind of health diagnosis inside your home. Super streamlined, beautiful application. We're so excited. He's about to launch pretty soon. So that's the one that, again, in that health tech space, a little bit earlier than our typical revenue numbers, but we had known Travis for a while, decided to back him again. And then another one that we came across is a company called Solace, and they do a wonderful job. It's direct to consumer cremation. So they recognize that this is, if you look at the cremation services industry, it's really riffed with kind of an old school way of thinking, lacks technology, lacks beautiful interface, lacks really that true human touch. So they decided to do it, launch the ability for consumers in that tough moment to just organize very quickly and thoughtfully the ability for someone to come and take care of their loved ones, do a cremation service in a very beautiful, thoughtful way, and just take care of everything. It makes it so easy, which is what you need in that moment when you're in one of the most difficult moments of your life. It's a Portland company, incredible revenue to date, incredible growth in just over the past year. So that's one that we're really excited to lead, and we just made that investment. So again, a little bit in the health, a little bit in the care and death tech space. So you kind of get a little sample there.
Well, great. So what are the challenges you find your startups face most these days?
I think, we are mostly a generalist firm with some focus areas. But I think one of the challenges that we find is a lot of people, again, it goes back to kind of the hype of venture capital. I don't think necessarily realize when they get into the relationship, both on the investor side as well as the entrepreneurship side, just how much of a relationship it really is. And also, as an investor, the relationship you have with your LPs, and that it's for the long haul. It's not just a 1 or 2 year period that you're in this relationship. It's really for the long haul. And I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that you're always, at the end of the day, investing in the best people you can find, and really staying disciplined about that. And then also the good businesses, and then also being thoughtful about where you decide to, raise money from or take money from on the entrepreneurship side. So, and also on the VC side with LPs, like making sure that we're really thoughtful about those people who are coming into our fund and going to be part of the journey with us. So I would say that it's not a challenge as much as it's just the thoughtfulness. I think another challenge right now is that there is a lot of capital in the market, and so valuations are climbing up from the investor perspective. And I think it just takes some discipline and to not kind of get carried away by that, and make sure you stick to your thesis. Like Rogue has done a very good job through all of our funds of sticking to our thesis, which sometimes mean that you say no to something that looks good and everybody else is doing, and you get a little bit of that FOMO, but you just have to say no, stay disciplined, and focus on where you're good at and where you have confidence, not necessarily get carried away. I would also advise too, for entrepreneurs, like it's so easy to, go on Twitter or, see who's been doing what. It's always a reminder that this business is not just deals and companies, it's humans, it's people. And so as much as you see all the glamour and glitter of other companies doing well or investors doing well, at the end of the day, everybody has their ups and downs. It's very challenging in all ways, and it's really exciting. But just find and surround yourself with people that can support you in those down times, those times that are really, really freaking tough, because that's what's most important. And know that everybody has them. It's just not necessarily what's talked about. And so always find your tribe of people that really help you through those tough moments.
And so what are the challenges the investor faces today?
Oh yeah, sorry. Like I mentioned before, on the investor side, I think it's that discipline. I think it's about sticking to your thesis, sticking to what you've modeled out. Of course, there's always the option, of course, there's always the 1 or 2 times that you let yourself if you feel every instinct in your body saying this is the best thing coming, I got to take a chance, go for it. But otherwise, yeah, I think the hardest thing is to stay disciplined and not get carried away and not just do what everybody else is doing. And also just be a really dedicated partner. So when you make that commitment to a company, if you're a fund that does lean in, and not necessarily a lot of investments, but it's a few investments very focused, if you make that commitment to an entrepreneur to really follow through and everything that you can, I think I see a little bit too much of where people don't necessarily do that follow through. And I think that's so important because at the end of the day, we're in the business of people, not just businesses, but great people build businesses. So the investor really has to stay disciplined, focus on great people, and the entrepreneur has to pick great partners. Easier said than done.
So you talked about several applications and sectors earlier in the interview. If you had to pick one or two that you think are really good immediate opportunities for investors to pursue, what do you put at the top of the list?
Oh man, I don't know that I would put any one industry or space at the top of the list. I think in general, trends that we see, so you'll find various companies within these general trends. I think one area, or more on the consumer side, is that people, again, feel more connected but disconnected than ever, especially even this past year. So that's where you're going to see the rise of different types of technology, different ways in which people are trying to bring people together, whether it's focused in micro communities and growing micro communities, whether it's things like, audio to really connect people instead of visual. And so I think we're going to see some different technologies connecting people like that. I also think that we're really seeing a much stronger evolution when it comes to the application of AI and machine learning, which I'm excited about. I think that kind of the first ride of it was a little elementary, and now we're getting into a way which much stronger adoption and much smarter in how it's being used and applied. I also believe that when it comes to, overall health, education, some areas that some people view as fundamental rights, we're really having conversations about access and what access means, both at an individual and a business level, in all aspects along that supply chain of what enables access. So I believe that that's going to become and continue, has become and will continue to be a strong focal point for people when it comes to building technology that allows access and connectivity. So again, very much general themes. And there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice it across industries or applications.
Well, great. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
I would say the only thing that I would add that we have not covered is that, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're starting out and you think venture capital is the way to go, I would just say, be willing to risk everything for your business. And if you're an investor, be willing to risk everything to make all of your investments work. I remind people that this is one of the riskiest areas. It's also the most exciting and most rewarding. And ultimately, if you love what you do, whether it's because you're building a business or you love what you do because you're an investor, you're not just in it to make money. You have to really be in it because you believe in it. I think you have to always anchor in your own personal why, your own personal purpose. And that's what drives so much of the positive results and outcomes that come with it.
Well, great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Well, you can go to our website, and on there we have, info at roguevp.com or info at roguewomen.com, WMN. And we're a small team, so it just goes directly to one of us. We do try to get back to people as soon as we can. I've even posted on Twitter before when I'm running a little bit behind and getting back to people. Sometimes things are busier than not. But yeah, that's always a great way. I'm also on LinkedIn, so people are welcome to, again, reach out to me on LinkedIn. We are full supporters of the cold outreach because we think you can find great companies no matter where you are.
Great. We'll include those in the show notes. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Hall T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.